I'm going to bring on Chang, who's really smart and runs an organization whose name I can't forget at Stanford University. He's a professor there.
Thanks, Salma.
How's everybody doing?
Good, good.
Thank you so much to the Neighborhood Funders Group for the kind invitation to be here today. I'm going to talk about cultural power. So let's start a little bit with, sort of what is culture, right? And for today, culture is a very difficult thing for folks to define. You can be an anthropology person forever and ever and not define culture successfully. So I'm just going to give you a working definition for today. For today, we'll say that culture is the realm of ideas, of images, of stories, of sounds, right? It's the narrative that we're immersed in every single day. It's the space that we all share together. And so in 2008, you remember 2008? It seems so long ago. We were so young and innocent back then, right? Oh, here we go, okay. Yeah, hope, right? Irrational exuberance. But we saw these images, literally, of hope being plastered all over the place, blooming like flowers, if you will. Cafes, restaurants, community centers, people's windows. This explosion of hope, literally, in our neighborhoods. And then what happens is the hope spills over, right? Past the party platform, past the candidate's agenda. The symbol of hope and change becomes a prompt, if you will, for all of these ideas that are not contained in the party platform, not contained by a candidate's agenda, ideas about alternative energy, about ending torture, about gay marriage, about immigration reform, a notion, a vision of unity. And so, again, irrational exuberance. Some of us were looking at this and we thought to ourselves, people say that politics is the art of the possible. Well, maybe in this case, art was making a new kind of politics possible. And so we had President Obama, right, who presents himself as a black and white man, literally, right? A symbol of reconciliation. Remember reconciliation, that idea? Seems so long ago, right? And he's colorized, literally, into red, white, and blue, with the name Hope put under it. But almost as soon as this happens, he's turned into a symbol of all things other. So not just a black man, not just a product of miscegenation, but a Muslim, a socialist, a quote-unquote illegal alien, and the culture wars are back in full swing. So now here we are, right? We're at the end of the Obama era, and we're living in serious times. These are times that are defined by hashtags, Laquan McDonald, Freddie Gray, Tamira Rice, Sandra Bland. These are times that are defined by the imperative, the moral imperative of the Black Lives Matter movement. And in reaction, politicians like Donald Trump are using racism, they're using xenophobia, they're using anti-black, anti-immigrant sentiments to mobilize people. And yes, it's not so hard to find a picture of Donald Trump looking crazy at all. But in some ways, he's crazy like a fox. So if we think about the way that he's mobilized, even this phrase, the silent majority, right? In 1968, Richard Nixon used this phrase to frame a culture wars, a kind of culture wars. And back then, we called them frames. These days, we call these things memes, right? So they make us laugh. Memes make us laugh. They make us angry. And they also bring us together in sorrow. What we understand now, is that Trump is not just a master manipulator of communications, right? There was a time when a lot of us in nonprofits, in the nonprofit world, kind of reduced this huge field of culture to communications. Trump is not just a master manipulator of communications. He's a master manipulator of culture. For Trump, Twitter is just another weapon, right? For Trump, culture is politics. It's the field on which he wages his war. So my point today is very simple. We need to understand the role of culture. the way that the other side uses it to reinforce inequity and injustice, and the way that we can use it to be able to bring about transformative justice. The first thing to note is that culture is often the place where attacks are felt first, right? So if we think about the grassroots movement against resegregation here in Oakland, and I use the term resegregation on purpose because I think the frame of gentrification is too small, right? Gentrification centers the city, but really it's just a smaller part of the larger trend, which is resegregation. We need to be talking not just about the cities, but the regions. But if we look at the grassroots movement in Oakland against resegregation, it reached an inflection point last fall when what we had were new residents calling in noise complaints to send in Oakland police to break up drumming circles here at Lake Merritt or choir practices in West Oakland, right? So both the aggression of resegregation that was happening and the reaction against it were clarified in the culture. And in these times, protests themselves become memes. They go viral. So the protest, the self-immolation of Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia sets off the Arab Spring, and in turn sets off the Occupy movement. We can't understand the social movements of recent years without understanding the power of culture. These movements have been organized outside of the traditional structures of politics. They've not conformed to traditional sort of forms of politics in terms of demand making, in terms of appeals, right? The famous logo of the Occupy movement was demand nothing, occupy everything. So these new movements have used tools of art, right? They've used culture, they've used media, they've explicitly been calls to the imagination, they've fostered creativity, and they've been cast as efforts to build a community of shared values. So Occupy Wall Street began, as all of these movements has, as a leap of social imagination beyond the stalemated politics of the moment, which are calcified by greed, by money, by racism. The undocumented movement branched from the mainline immigration reform movement, right? And it caused us to challenge, it challenged, in fact, our very definitions of what it means to be American. Who has rights? Who can be enfranchised? Who is a quote-unquote citizen? So these movements have been about policies and power, but they've also drawn us into the existential questions of what it means to be human and what it means to live together in community, right? The moral imperative of the movement for Black Lives originates in the very idea that we need to be able to fight to be seen in all of our difference and all of our humanity. Because if we can be seen in all of our humanity, then maybe we can form a more equal and just community. And that's really what it's all about in the end. Abraham Lincoln once said that public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. And he added, consequently, he who molds public sentiment goes deeper than he who enacts statutes or pronounces decisions. No disrespect, Cindy, at all. But he who molds public sentiment makes statutes and decisions possible or impossible to be executed. So culture is where we can introduce these ideas of change, where we can attach emotions to concrete ideas, concrete policies, foster enthusiasm for our values. Culture is where we change the narrative. It allows people to imagine what change can look like and feel like, and it makes that change feel not just possible, but inevitable. And I say all of that to say this, that cultural change always precedes political change, right? It always precedes policy change. If we look at it this way, then we can begin to see that culture and those who work in culture are central. They're not peripheral to social change. Instead of being the ones that we call last to be part of the process, come make me a poster, come sing me a song at my rally, they are, in fact, the ones who are moving public sentiment on a day-to-day type of basis, right? Cultures like the ocean, it never stops moving. It's moving in one direction, it's moving in the other direction. And that's what folks in the culture are working in. They're moving in this ocean of ideas and opinions. And when we talk about public policy questions, the questions narrow, actually, right? To, should it be this amount? Should it be that amount? Should we cap it here? Should we cap it there? Artists are instead dealing with, in the world, the questions that cut to the very core of how we as a society think. So in the past, when we talked about artists and social change, we often spoke about it in relationship to communications. And we made messaging captive to the policy process, artists captive to the messaging. We foreclosed the big questions to focus on the small questions. Changing the culture is not only about better messaging. Communication strategy is only one part of cultural strategy. So ultimately, communications is like surfing the wave, and we want to be making the waves. How do we do this? Well, we have to build two areas of infrastructure. The first is cultural organizing, which is about bringing together creative producers and assets in collaboration with other change agents to make interventions in the culture. And the other is cultural strategy, because these interventions have to be strategic. Most efforts to engage the creative community have been insufficient, under-coordinated, non-strategic. So cultural strategy is a process of thinking these kinds of things through. But in order for us to be effective, we also have to understand the need for cultural equity. So, sorry about that, I missed that point here, but let's move this real quickly. I want to just focus for a second here on cultural equity. There's a lot of ways to talk about this. The Oscars So White was one, but here's another. Of every foundation dollar, 11 cents goes to the arts, 5.5 cents goes to arts organizations making budgets of more than $5 million, 1 cent goes to arts organizations representing underrepresented communities, and less than half a cent goes to arts organizations for justice work. Now, the last thing I want to say here, the way I want to close here, is to say that Martin Luther King, near the end of his life, had thoughts about the fact that we needed to move towards changing the culture. He talked about a true revolution. He realized that reform efforts, passing bills was not enough. And he said, a true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. So we had to change the culture. And at its deepest level, he understood that the culture moves people by embedding values into ideas, to images, to stories, and winning them over to these values. And so we can go on to be able to speak the language of dreams and think about how we might be able to dream together. Thank you very much.